Canadians spell words differently. Canadians definitely talk differently.
Well, all the Cape was to go to the ocean.
The fuss is about taking our citizens. It's about not censoring our art. It's about...
Some think our language is
a corrupt dialogue.
So I was walking down the street, eh?
It's all a little confusing.
Either.
We're talking Canadian.
Like, you guys still remember first day of school in grade 9? And like, all our kilts were like, oh my god. Down to here.
Sometimes, to be absolutely frank, Canadians do sound a bit American.
And now I have to like choose like what to wear, like everything. I don't know if I can.
These teenagers are in Toronto. They could be somewhere in LA or on Mars.
Like, then you just get weird looks at school if you show up in like a skirt. Because basically anywhere around here, if you show up in a skirt, people give you weird looks.
So my reason for speaking to you about the monarchy, the highest institution of our society.
But that's Canadian too, an obsolete form spoken by our first Canadian-born Governor-General, Vincent Massey.
We can't slow the pace of human events.
We don't sound like that now, although some of it is stuck.
And this evening I want to talk to you about a very special part of present-day Canada, the monarchy.
You hear just a hint of it here and there, the skirmishes in a centuries-old battle between American English and English English. We're in the middle, talking Canadian.
That polyester leisure suit?
Leisure.
Leisure.
It's definitely leisure.
I guarantee you, it's leisure.
Harassment. Harassment. No, it's harassment.
Schedule.
Schedule.
The proper pronunciation is schedule.
Napkin.
Serviette.
Napkin.
Either. Either.
These Vancouver teenagers can't decide. Now that's talking Canadian. But there's more to it than that. For one thing, what it means to talk Canadian is constantly changing.
I don't know. I use both. Yeah.
And nobody completely understands how or why. Jack Chambers is a linguist. He spent decades hunting, trapping, tagging, and dissecting Canadian English. That thing he's sitting on, for example, Canadians used to call it a Chesterfield, after an eminent British nobleman.
Well, Chesterfield was the great Canadianism because it originated in England, but as the name for a very special piece of furniture, a monstrous divan, settee, Davenport. Then the word came to Canada for the name of any piece of furniture that was upholstered and stuffed and held 2 or 3 or 4 people. It has been supplanted since the 1950s by the word couch. First there was a little ripple in favor of sofa, and then that died away and couch became the standard term and is now almost exclusively the term that's known by teenagers and people in their 20s across Canada.
The Americans won the couch war. But when push came to shove, Canadians preferred the British for this. It's a
tap.
The Americans call it a faucet. And this.
Luggage.
Yeah, luggage, yes.
In Dallas, it's baggage.
Blinds. Blinds, yeah.
In Detroit, they're shades. But when it comes to this,
Rubber band. Rubber band. Rubber band. Rubber band.
the British elastic seems to be losing its grip.
An elastic band.
Because when there's a choice, we usually choose American. Take words to do with cars. do you think you'd hear this in Moose Jaw?
I took a diversion off the motorway looking for some petrol. At the pump, the fit bloke took a spanner under my bonnet to check my gearbox fluid and sparking plugs. When he was satisfied, he took his chamois to my windscreen.
You wouldn't, because English and American English started going in different directions well before cars and car words were invented. And Canadian English is basically American English, imported by English-speaking American loyalists who moved to Canada to get away from the Revolution. This was in the late 1700s. They sounded a lot like this.
I've been fixing and cutting my field here near on 10 days, Abijah.
Uh-huh. Guess you better sally out then before your limbs get considerable tired from standing there.
Certainly.
It's not quite young and bluer, but it's the foundation of Canadian English, and it's Yankee.
Scarce ever was a good field that didn't get cut.
Uh-huh.
The Loyalists brought with them the accent and dialect of the Midland United States, which was different by then from the accent and dialect that was spoken in England. Not only because of changes that had happened in North America, but also because of cataclysmic changes that had happened in England at the same period. In the 1700s, England became R-less, for one thing. So English people say ca and cot, where we say car and cart with an R in them.
Car, cart.
Car, cart.
There were also vowel changes, branch and France and dance, words like that which have an ah sound, where we have branch and France and dance, an ah sound. And the difference is, although it's only a small vowel difference, makes a real impression on our ears. That also is a change that took place in England after the colonization of North America.
The Loyalists set up the school systems in Upper Canada. Their children talked and spelled American.
Lieutenant, XYZ. Honor, HONOR.
And used American terms instead of British ones,
Wagon,
for what the British called a carriage,
fix,
when the British said mend,
store,
instead of shop. This worried the British governors who still ran Canada, especially after the Americans invaded in 1812. They brought in 1 million people direct from Britain, with no adulterating stopovers in the United States allowed. Some of them, the more delicate blossoms, were appalled by the Americanisms that assailed their refined and discriminating ears. The Reverend A. Constable Geeky put it to the Canadian Institute in brutal terms. The local language was
a corrupt dialogue full of lawless and vulgar innovations that threatened to produce a language as unlike our noble mother tongue as the Negro Patois or the Chinese Pidgin English.
Geeky considered his language had been ravished, not just by
wagon and store,
but
boss
instead of master, and
bug
for any kind of insect.
To call a firefly a lightning bug is not only an abuse of language, but a breach of good taste, which it might be thought no person of refinement could ever perpetrate.
Well, yes. Something had to be done. A battalion of Scottish schoolmasters was deployed to put things back to rights.
Lieutenant, XYZ. Honor, HONOUR.
In the same spirit, our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, decreed that British OUR spellings be official in Canada. No coarse and stubby Yankee ORs. But in spite of the Scots, the students still talked like Yankees, and before you knew it, the British kids sounded just like them.
Hello. Would you lend me some paper? Paper? Paper. Yes. Would you lend me some paper? Thank you. Thanks.
And thanks to her, Canadians yet unborn would say thanks sometimes instead of thank you. And so would their children, and their children, and so will ours. Or most of them. West is west, and east is east, and never the twain shall sound the same. American English was winning Upper Canada, but by God, the British held Newfoundland. Most settlers came here directly from West Country England and Eastern Ireland. In the isolated outports, they handed down their language, pure and whole and colorful.
And people were very inventive at telling stories. And there were expressions like having a good cuffer, you know, where people would get together and tell exaggerated stories and so on.
Well, brother, I said you can't have a clean shave, I can't have a bruised face.
People were expected to entertain one another. If you couldn't entertain verbally, really you were sort of ostracized. People didn't want to see you if you couldn't entertain them verbally.
Newfoundlanders, now and then, can still entertain verbally.
This is a jihad. This is a holy war. The snow keeps coming, Frank. The back deck has been crushed. We haven't seen the dogs in weeks, and they're charging $5 for a head of rotten lettuce up to Sobeys.
When Newfoundland linguist Harold Paddock is in town, he talks like what Newfoundlanders call a townie. But when he's back on his North Shore island, he talks North Shore, just like his great-grandparents.
Well, well, me cousin Howard Ryder. How was the old man?
Pretty good, Judge.
I suppose they can't walk so fast as they could, Cass?
I think I'll walk faster.
A little tough to follow if you come from away, which may not be accidental.
Oh, yeah.
The sheep had all the boughs eat off, what was
So it was
sticking
wood.
out. So like barbed wire, see?
Yeah, yeah.
And he made a smack at me, backhanded, you know, like that. And he wrapped right around me there, huh?
Oh.
Took off every pick of skin where he struck.
Newfoundland talk is slightly fading now. It's a little more like mainland speech. It's that confederation.
And in the grammar, you know, the suppression of the after perfect. Look what you're after doing now. This would give way to look what you've done now, which sounds so weak and feeble, you know. Look what you're after doing now. Look what you're after doing. Right? You know, it's just so much more punchy, right?
You find distinct accents in Atlantic Canada in places the middle colony loyalists didn't get to first. The sounds of Gaelic can be heard in the English of Cape Breton.
Yes. Oh, when the dance would be over, sometimes some of them would start fighting.
And there's a rich mix of other sounds, from black loyalist English to traces of French and German. In the West, it's mostly Yankee loyalist, straight from Ontario. Ottawa sent Ontario settlers west to balance and absorb the French and Métis. The Ukrainians came later, and the Poles, and all the rest. But the common accent was loyalist. The vocabulary, though, was homemade, fixed up on the spot. Old words spiffed up and put to work for completely new things. Black blizzard for a dust storm. Bluff for a grove of trees. And they borrowed words from the French and Métis. Coulee for a small ravine, and prairie itself from the French for meadow. There was even a local language called Bungay, a fusion of French, English, and Cree. Then another strong shot of American as tens of thousands of settlers moved north across the border. They brought along Spanish ranching words from the American Southwest. Bronco, canyon, rodeo, stampede, lasso, and ranch from the Spanish rancho. From American gold seekers in the Yukon and Fraser Valley came hitting pay dirt, panning out, and striking it rich. From loggers up and down the West Coast, Skid Road and Flunky. And from Chinook jargon, another mixture of native languages with French and English, came High Muckamuck for big shot, Skookum for grand or strong, and Chinook for warm wind. There were Chinook jargon dictionaries to help the tenderfeet pick up the vocabulary. In the century since then, the brawny new language has crowded out the British forms the way Canadian nationalism crowded out the Empire.
Looking at it closely, you will find that it does so in a number of ways.
Farewell then to Vincent Massey's locution, the form linguists call Canadian dainty. Canadian dainty was finished off by the huge waves of immigrants who came after World War II, most of them not from Britain. The current Governor General, Adrienne Clarkson, came with her family from Hong Kong. She doesn't sound very much like Vincent Massey.
It is a pleasure to greet you in the Jubilee year of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
It's clear, clean Central Canada speech with no across the pond to it at all.
We will continue to speak out in every forum for the values of pluralism, freedom, and democracy.
In fact, if you search the archives, you'll find her saying things that would give A. Constable Geeky the pip.
The discount store pioneer. Fisher is a hardline union boss. A happy-go-lucky Canadian, eh?
Spelling still counts, of course. You'll remember Sir John A. Macdonald declared O-U-R to be the proper Canadian way. He thought it was British, and maybe it was back then. But Catherine Barber, who edits the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, says it's just Canadian now. Not long ago, her dictionary listed labor under O-U-R, and that changed the game across the country.
When we were researching the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, the Canadian press style was to spell O-U-R words with an O-R, and it had been their style for a very long time. And the Canadian press has a very strong influence on printed matter in Canada, on newspapers and magazines. What has happened subsequently, since the dictionary came out, the Canadian press has switched to O-U-R spellings. So there's actually been an increase in O-U-R spellings.
L-A-B-O-U-R.
The Canuck way.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're under 20, the Oxford Canadian Dictionary usage is preferred.
Because that's how I learned it, and it's like Canadian, and I don't like when Americans always think they're right.
L-A-B-O-U-R!
Yeah!
Okay, I'm gonna try this one before I fall over.
Maybe these Vancouver kids spell like Canadians, but don't they talk like Californians?
What are you gonna wear with your the shorts you brought? Like, if you? I don't know. Like, what would you wear?
Well, no, not exactly. We talk to other Canadians more than we talk to Americans, and that means some things about the way we talk are distinct.
No, I'm not saying at all.
But why? Doesn't television rule the universe? Why can't it change the way we talk?
No, it doesn't make you look fat. It's just not. You couldn't look fat if you tried.
Entertainment Tonight came down like...
Well, sure, Americans make most of our TV, and Americans on TV speak American, so we speak American. Actually, no.
Busy production schedule.
Hello, Mrs.
We use expressions from movies and TV.
Yeah, baby! Oh! What a totally amazing, excellent discovery. Not!
But 20 years of watching All in the Family wouldn't change your grammar or sentence structure, or make you sound like Archie.
Oh, yeah, sure. Let me tell you something. When a first burglar breaks into this house, you all turn to me and holler, do something. You know what I'm going to do?
Television doesn't do that. It's talking to other people that does. At Niagara Falls, there's a few hundred meters of river between Canadians and Americans.
See that honey brown? Can I get it? That little honey brown, something like that. Similar to that.
That's all. But listen to the table talk in Niagara Falls, New York.
It's not a couple's show. Okay. Originally it was going to be, but then it was out of hand. There would have been 150 people there. It's like, you know
That
what?
doesn't sound Canadian. How come?
Are we done with this?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
According to Edmonton drama professor David Lee, it's partly the rhythm of our speech, that musical quality called intonation. Lee says that Canadians tend to end each sentence by moving their tone of voice slightly upward, unlike Americans.
I think generally, most Americans, they go up early in the sentence, stress-wise, and then they come down hard at the end. So I'm very happy to be here today. Whereas a Canadian has a very gentle drifting up pattern. I'm very happy to be here today. Would you pass me that book? Would you like to go out for some dinner? Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to do these one at a time. The first thing I want you to do is...
Lee's acting students need to learn that American pattern if they're going to do American accents.
Let's do the next one, Dale.
Okay. My house is down the street.
Good. Try lifting house up even a little bit more.
My house is down the street.
Good. There we go. You hear how that sounds much more American, doesn't it? Okay. Let's do the next one. Renee.
Would you like to go out for some dinner?
Good. Dinner, even harder.
Dinner.
Yeah, again. Would you like to go out for some dinner?
Would you like to go out for some dinner?
Good. Better.
Apart from intonation, what makes us different from Americans has mostly to do with how we pronounce vowels. For example, Canadians pronounce the words
caught
and
caught
the same. Listen again.
Caught, caught.
For most Americans, they're different.
Caught. Caught.
Catch that?
Caught. Caught.
The same goes for
stocking
and
stocking.
Canadians say them the same. Americans don't.
Stocking, stalking.
We say
house
and
about.
Americans say
house
and
about.
And hear what we say as something like
who's
and
a boot.
And they think we're hilarious. Look at the American movie South Park.
As the Canadian ambassador, I hereby condemn the actions taken by America in apprehending Townsend Phillips.
We don't know what all the fuss is about.
The fuss is about taking our citizens. It's about not censoring our art. It's about what's so goddamn funny?
Nothing. Could you tell us again what your argument is all about?
This is not about diplomacy. This is about dignity. This is about respect. This is about realizing that humor is...
We say
sorry.
They say
sorry
when they say it.
Because we really need to get to something that's a little closer to what East Indian women wear,
I was just
right?
Sorry.
It's closer to sorry, right? And this is what I hear more than any other word from actors who worked on who've gone to the States or worked with Americans. You know, that's the thing they get ribbed for. You're what? You're sorry? Because, of course, they're sorry.
We're going to have any travel problems for the better part of tomorrow.
And, of course, all this can change at a century's notice. For example, something the Americans have that we don't, the Northern City Shift, which has been going on in places like Niagara Falls, New York, for 50 years.
It's happening in Rochester and Syracuse, Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, all the way to Minneapolis. And it is a movement of the vowel sounds in American English. So where we say top and box, they say tap and backs. Where we say an and family, they say an and family.
It's not anymore. Would you write it on an index card?
It's important because it shows the strength of the Canadian-U.S. border as a linguistic divide. That northern city shift that's happening in all those big American cities has not touched any part of Canada. There is no trace of it in any of the Canadian border cities or anywhere else in Canada.
How's it going, eh?
Oh, yeah. A. Everybody knows A, eh? Although nobody's really sure where A came from. Only that for Canadians, it's a Swiss Army knife of a word with a million handy uses.
So I was walking down the street, eh? I had a couple of beers, I was feeling pretty good, eh? When all of a sudden I noticed this really big guy, eh? He must have weighed like 220 pounds, eh? I mean, I could see him real far off. He was a real big guy, eh? Me, I'm just minding my own business, eh? And this guy's taking up the whole sidewalk, eh? So when he got close, I just stepped down in the gutter, eh? He went right on by, eh? I gave up, eh? What have you done, eh?
Then there are Canadian words, our private stock, for our consumption only. The Canadian Oxford Dictionary team spent 5 years tracking them down, reading everything from newspapers to Tim Hortons coffee cups to flyers from Canadian Tire. Here's what they found. Some familiar Canadian foods like cottage rolls, date squares, and butter tarts, of course. Believe it or not, nobody else eats these. And food that's known by names that only Canadians use, some of them really obscure. We call this Friulano cheese, but everyone else calls it Montaggio cheese. And they found some uniquely Canadian spellings for everyday foods like yogurt. Who but Canadians would spell it like this? It works in French and English. In all, they found 2,000 words we use and nobody else does.
What's amazing is the ordinariness of the words that we find to be Canadianisms that we never realized that other people didn't use. You know, words like fishboat from and eaves trough and things like that. Even Friulano cheese, you know, gas bar, yeah. If you've grown up with those words, you think everyone uses them. I mean, my favorite was I grew up in Winnipeg, and I've always called a jelly-filled donut a jam buster, and I thought everyone in the world called them jam busters, and why would you call them anything else? And it wasn't actually until I started working on this dictionary that I discovered that really only Manitobans use jam buster. Maybe a few people, you know, going towards Regina and Thunder Bay, but mostly it's a Manitoban thing.
Dipsy Doodle's pretty good. In Canada, if you're trying to stick handle your way through bureaucracy, don't you, Dipsy Doodle? Is that right?
You can.
Yeah.
In the Thunder Bay area.
You have to be careful with this one.
Yes, we do. Especially when in advertising, we found that in the Thunder Bay area, it seems to be the only part of the country, and possibly the only only place in North America that uses the word shag to refer to a combined shower and stag party. So it's interesting to see advertisements from Thunder Bay for
shag in our hall.
Yeah, hall available for shag. But that's the kind of regional, quirky Canadianism that makes the language interesting.
And here are some other words that only Canadians use. Words to do with politics.
Bagman.
Scrum. Lockup. Bear pit session. Riding.
Words about our national pastime, the liquid one, that is.
Do for.
Bush party.
Skunky.
Molson muscle.
Even a bunch of words that all have the same subject, underwear. We just can't agree what to call it.
Gotchies.
Gotch.
Gitch.
And here's one for Reverend Geeky. Canadians love expressions that have to do with barnyards, rear ends, and the products thereof. There's cat's ass, shit disturber, and pinch of coon shit. And one we borrowed from England, Canadians long to be happy as a pig in shit. Your aunt in Montreal wouldn't say that, but you should hear what she puts her coat on. A hanger. Besides Canadian words, in places like Montreal, there are new Canadian dialects beginning to turn up. Charles Boberg studies the language of Montreal's Italian and Jewish communities, especially where they are close-knit and independent. He's finding pronunciations like coat hanger hanging on there.
So I'd like you to just read the first column on this page and the...
Joe Tuzzolino was born in Montreal and grew up in an Italian neighborhood. He's one of the Italian Montrealers Boberg has been studying.
Bar, sit, file, student, caller.
Tuzzolino has kept more of his parents' language in his speech than most Canadian-born children of immigrants.
Pool, food, stone, house, hanger.
When you were growing up in the East End of Montreal, did you have any experience with non-Italians, with people outside the Italian community?
No. Until maybe I went to college. Non-Italians, as far as white non-Italians, never really saw any white non-Italians.
Boberg thinks these patterns might be the beginning of lasting local dialects, the kind that tend to appear as countries get older. He thinks they're more likely to develop in Montreal than in other multicultural Canadian cities.
In Toronto, even though certain people grow up in communities where most of the people around them are from their own ethnic group, they nevertheless get exposure to English as the ambient language in the community. In Montreal, however, the children of immigrants have generally gone to French school. In fact, now go to French school by law. So there's very little opportunity to learn standard Canadian English.
It's fun. That's the thing about the movie. Like it's.
Joe Tuzzolino spends his spare time with other Italian Montrealers.
The exact same thing is we have to look for costume stores.
Listen for the hard T's at the end of words and the G's in words like wedding.
Before we went to this, I'm gonna leave a wedding to go watch
on a Friday night. First of all, there's no weddings on Friday.
Comedy show. You guys will. Yeah, but that's still good. Considering you were in a high-class restaurant. Exactly.
Yeah.
Usually one person you pay about $100.
I worked there for 6 months. I never did that. Yeah.
Okay,
First of all, Friday is the first part of the weekend.
I'm talking about Saturday night.
Yeah, so don't forget, because once I forgot, and I had...
You don't have to be Italian to use those G's and T's.
Did they mind? Did the waiters look upset?
No.
Shandel Rothman, David Sulicianu, and Jack Rudnicki all grew up in the mostly Jewish Côte-Saint-Luc area of Montreal.
Bring a picnic supper, bring the lawn chairs and a book, and just...
Montreal Jews share some habits with Montreal Italians, but they have some little twists of their own, all of them drawn from Yiddish.
Jewish speakers, for instance, are remarkable for pronouncing the I vowel, the I sound, in a word like high or time, further back in the mouth than other people do. So it sounds something like high or time. When you hear someone saying high and time, they're most likely going to be a Jewish Montrealer. The Italians, on the other hand, are remarkable for not participating in a change that is sweeping most of North America, which is the vowel oo in a word like do or to tends to be pronounced much further forward in the mouth now, especially by young North Americans.
Actually, getting back to this weekend, what do we want to do?
So you hear Italians saying things like do and tu, which really marks them off as being different.
Yeah, because that's what I do when I usually speak.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah. You do that too.
I do that too.
Not to say Joe and his friends speak a separate language. They use the new words we all use, words that are emerging from technology. The Industrial Revolution produced petrol and bonnet on one side of the Atlantic and gas and hood on the other. But today's revolutions are producing shared new terms. Gigabyte, PMS, fax, quark, autoimmunity. And foreign foods that once seemed exotic are now known everywhere. Sushi, cappuccino, dim sum, salsa, shish kebab. And there has been a little sanding down of our English, particularly among Canadians under 30. Pronunciations are changing to match changes in English elsewhere. For example, we used to say
news
and
Tuesday.
Now that Y sound is gone, and it's
news
and
Tuesday.
We used to say
which
and
weather.
Now that H sound is gone, and
which
and
weather
are becoming the rule almost everywhere. And if you think the past tense of dive is dived and of sneak is sneaked, as it used to be, they sneaked one past you.
Knock. No way.
Well, there is some division.
You don't say
sneak. Sneak. It's
Oh my God, it's sneak.
Sneak.
Come on.
Dive.
Dive.
Dove.
And snuck and dove are part of what seems to be a standardization process that is happening in all the Englishes of the world. So, snuck and dove will be, or appear to be, the verb forms for those verbs everywhere English is spoken sometime in the next 20 or 30 years.
No, it's still cheaper than like how the cheapest one they would you can get now.
Then there's this new speech pattern which is growing like an unwanted weed among teenagers. It's this thing where you make every sentence sound like a question. Drives the geezers crazy. It's called uptalk, and it's turning up everywhere English is spoken.
And we left, and then we didn't end up seeing each other after. But then for some reason at the Finch pickup place, he was there, but then my friend was already coming to pick me up. So then he started talking to me, and then I was kind of like trying to look away, because no longer was there like a group of people there. It was just like me, him, and like some other guy. I'm just like, okay. And then we just like...
And then there's like. Sally Tagliamonte, like all linguists, hears things in everyday speech the rest of us miss. She noticed that her daughters and her students were saying like a lot, but saying it in particular ways. She studied it and found like use has grown dramatically since it first showed up about 60 years ago. Nobody's quite sure where. And it's become much more than the all-purpose filler most of us assume.
I saw them, I was like, what happened?
Does like occur just anywhere? Absolutely not. It does not just occur anywhere. If you look and you isolate exactly where teenagers and tweens and university students are using like, they're using it in 3 very specific locations. They're using it at the beginning of a sentence.
Like, if you go to the mall in a skirt, people are like, what the hell?
They're using it before a noun phrase.
Wear like a jean skirt. I'm wearing a jean skirt and maybe a half top.
And they're using it before a verb.
I think it's better now that we sort of got into this fight, because so now we can like see more people and we're not always like just together.
That's on top of the so-called quotative like.
He's like with me, and she's like, yeah. She's all like up beside me on the cafe table, like, and he's like, what?
The one that's spreading fastest, even to isolated parts of the globe.
He's like, is this for your book? And I'm like, no. And I just started laughing, and then Carmen's like, oh my God, you should have said yes.
That's nice. No, but he was like, yeah, I have to write my speech. And I was like, well, I don't know how much we raised because we haven't tallied it. And she was so skinny. She was like,
where?
Like half me. Like, oh my God, you serious?
Who?
Yeah.
Who?
This girl, I don't know. I just
Every single time I say
like,
my mom says that it's improper to say like all the time. So every single time I say like,
me chip, so take a chip.
when I say like, she says like after me.
Yeah.
Get used to it, parents. It all adds up to something that might be like a permanent part of the language.
When you find a feature of language being used in a very specific location, way more than any other place, then that gives us clues that something is actually happening in the language itself. And in the case of like, the fact that it is so frequently used in a specific location, for example, before a noun, makes us suspect that something might be really going on in the grammar.
Look at them.
And as for so instead of really or very, that could stick around too.
I think they're so cute. Look, they're like, and they don't even have a zipper. They're so comfy.
You might say, that's very interesting, but someone else might say, that's so not true. Is that a grammatical error? Well, so not true is maybe not part of the grammatical rules today, but maybe it will be in the future.
Thomas is going out with Antonia. Antonia's going out with...
Since when did they go out?
You know Antonia?
Yeah.
Hey, Jennifer's going out with Max Weber.
Are you serious?
And...
Canadian English is not English English. It's not American English. It's us. It's changing to match changes happening around the world. But does that mean it's fading? No. The more we pick up from other English speakers, the harder we try to keep whatever we think defines us as Canadian.
He's best friends with Travis and Nick.
So we'll keep on doing that as long as we can, and then when some of those disappear or get swallowed up in a kind of a broader spectrum, we'll come up with other markers that mark us in the same way. Maybe when everybody in the United States merges the vowels in caught and caught, then we'll have to find something else to be very Canadian about.
He wants to be gold dust in the third year.
And the same applies to local differences in the way we talk. They may become much more pronounced.
You're probably going to be fed up in the next one.
It could be Edmonton and Calgary will become quite different, Toronto and Ottawa, Victoria and Vancouver. If we could come back in 100 years, you might be able to instantly recognize that the person's from Ottawa instead of Toronto. And that should be so. I mean, if you're from the national capital, you should sound better than somebody from Hogtown, right?
In fact, after 150 years or so of observation and contemplation, of listening to the wonderful, blunt poetry of our language, even the Reverend A. Constable Geeky might join the rest of us in talking Canadian.
I've had the biscuit with going snaky about all these Canadian words. Bug, store, boss, loony, toonie, pogie. They're all pretty good Canadian words. I'm learning to talk Canadian, eh?
It's an overwhelming number of people. Pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Oh. Thank you. And then we'll go to a hockey game. Is that what we do here? Yeah. And a beer. Go to the store.